Thank you so much. Again, Matthew Lee, and Dictionaries as Datapoints. All right, as he said, I am a member of SIL Cameroon, and I serve there as a language technology specialist. That means that I get to help the linguists with the problems that they run into in Flex or paratext or converting documents, but I don't have to do viruses or spam or broken hard drives, things like that. There are other people for doing that, which is wonderful. I'm only about midway, if that, through my master's degree here in descriptive linguistics, and my background from college is James Madison University. I have a Bachelor of Science in Integrated Science and Technology, which is basically science and technology problem solving across many domains. I joined Wycliffe USA in 2008, and I served in Cameroon, and I married Teresa, who is somewhere around here, over there, in 2013, and she will be teaching kindergarten in Cameroon once we get back over there. Hopefully by fall 2015, we'll be in Cameroon. This presentation is based on a course that I took called Linked Data in Linguistics. It was an independent study course under Gary Simons, and it consisted of 4 weeks of research on linked data, and then another 4 weeks of a project, practical project. The textbook we used, just so you know, there are people talking about linked data in linguistics, is this by Chiarcos, Nordhoff, and Hellman, which is just it's full of articles that are showing the ways that you can make linguistic data smarter and to share, connect, and analyze it in new ways. So the course goals were for me to learn about linked data and how it can be used in linguistics, to learn the technology necessary to transform XML data, to actually transform a lexical database into an interoperable format, and to demonstrate interesting cross-linguistic searching across those databases. Those are my goals. Interoperability, which apparently Pete has a problem with this word, the ability of a system to work with or use, ability of a system to work with or use the parts or equipment of another system, and adjective is interoperable. So in this case, I'm having Flex dictionaries interoperable with other Flex dictionaries. Eventually, later, it could be other things could be moved into that fold so that they're interoperable as well. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Interoperable lexicons are not a new idea. They're new-ish, but Gary proposed it at least by 2005. But at that point, there really weren't that many XML lexicons out there to be transformed. Most of the databases, if they were databases, would have been SFM at that point, because that was really the start of LinguaLinks and Flex around that time. That's when they were getting rolling. So thanks to the advances of XML-based lexical tools, Fieldworks Language Explorer, we say, and I guess possibly Lexis, we can now move forward into that reality. Helen Arister-Dry and a team from Max Planck has attempted in 2011 to create a bridge between Flex lexicons and that other product I mentioned, which is Lexis, which uses LMF lexicons. And they did get a whole bunch of lexicons together, but there really wasn't any interesting interoperability. You can search, and it will point you to the entry in one of those dictionaries. The dictionaries aren't really connected in any meaningful way that I could find. So it doesn't seem there was any much attempt to do cross-linguistic comparison on that data. So here we have a page from an English dictionary. How much information is on this page? Plenty, all right? Well, your brain already knows how to interpret this data. It sees a dictionary, language, words, phrases, pronunciations, meaning, relationships, and categories. Your brain is an amazing thing that it can see that, and it can figure out what all of these things are based on the layout and the format and other understanding that you already have. So let's move it into a desktop publishing program just for as an example. This is Microsoft Word, but just so that you know that I'm not picking specifically on Word, this could be Microsoft Publisher, it could be LibreOffice or OpenOffice, it could be Adobe InDesign, it could be Apple's Pages, but back to Word. These programs are designed for creating formatted documents. They're not designed to organize data. So what does Word really understand about this document that's on the screen here? That, pretty much. So though it can reliably print your document, well, if you've got a good printer, Word knows almost nothing about the structure of your document. How many facts can the computer access? Can you ask it for a list of lexemes? And can Word help you to create a reversal on your dictionary? Probably not. So the computer understands from that there's a block of characters, that these characters are sometimes separated by paragraph marks. Some of it should be bold, some in italics, columns. It should be printed like this. That's really the information that's there. So as a review, with a formatted dictionary, you get text, you get formatting, and that's all. That's what you see is all you get, as Gary likes to say. So, moving forward into lexical databases, I've converted the previous document into another format. How many of you recognize what this format is? All right, a few? Good. This is standard format. So after converting all the data that was on that page, I came up with 282 facts, 282 lines of SFM coming directly from that single page. And so, well, now that it's in this format, I could search and filter the data if I put it into Toolbox. So people love Toolbox. The best part of Toolbox for working is that it doesn't constrain you in any way. But the worst part about Toolbox is that it doesn't constrain you in any way, especially when you get to publishing. So if you want to add a custom column that keeps track of the words that you taught your pet parrot, it will let you put it in there and let you put it anywhere. And as a result, Toolbox lexicons end up over the years to end up with mixes of different abbreviations and structures and other things that were thrown in that are only in some entries. They tend to be very inconsistent, and there's really not a safety net to make sure that you have been consistent. So again, what the computer really understands about a Toolbox database? Well, it understands at this point that you have categories. This is a category here of lexeme, and then part of speech, sense number, and definition in English. And although there are published standards for what this structure is and what this structure should be, people are very liberal with it, and a lot of times it really requires asking the person that wrote the database to figure out what some of this structure really is. It's not self-describing very well. So to publish a Toolbox dictionary, you have to put all that structure back in and figure out what the structure is, which means that you need to go through and find ways of making every entry consistent. Check your cross-references, make sure that it's actually pointing somewhere. Find words without glosses, for example. Standardize your abbreviations, do the formatting, export it out to a desktop publishing program, and find and format your guide words for every page. This is at least a year process to publish a Toolbox dictionary for most people. Sometimes it's often more than that. So at best, publishing a Toolbox dictionary is like this. But more often it's square peg, round hole. Just trying to get it out and get it into a format where it actually fits. So we've moved a step forward. We now have data categories, and we have Toolbox will actually keep track of which languages data is in, or at least which encoding it is in. So that's a little bit further. Now you can say, oh, well, that's in this language, that's in this language. And again, your brain is still seeing all of these other things from the other column. Moving forward again. XML is structured data. So what I mean by structure, well, lexicon has many entries. And so we have an example here of 2 entries. And for those of you on that side, it's over there. And for that entry can have many different things underneath it. So you can have pronunciation, senses, and this one has a pronunciation and a sense. And under that sense, it has a definition, a part of speech, and that's that custom column I had before of the words I taught Polly. But in this case, that word that field is actually somewhere, is actually in a useful place. And it's in the structure, in the correct structure, because you would be teaching the bird a certain sense of a word. So it's usefully, or it's in the structure, which is very useful for later on. Also, the example sentence has an example and a translation, just very structured. So what does XML data look like? This is Lift XML. This is a standard that was developed for making interoperability of databases, mainly between WeSay and Flex. But it looks, to most people, this is very intimidating, but it's really the same structure I just showed you in a flow form. So you still have your entry, and the entry has a starting point up here and an ending point. You still have your senses, and so the sense starts here and ends here. You still have the pronunciation, and the pronunciation starts there and ends there. This XML is self-descriptive. If it's a well-designed XML data or XML form, then you should be able to look at these tags and figure out what that data inside is. So we know that what is in here, oh, I have a red one. What is in here should be the definition, and it is. And that definition is in English. So now the languages are actually embedded in the document as well. And this is in Unicode, so you could display almost any character, and if someone else comes out or grabs this file 10, 20, 30 years down the road, and they have a Unicode font, they're going to be able to read it. You don't have to distribute the font anymore that you use to develop your lexicon. There are transformation technologies, XSLT, CSS, XSLFO, and LaTeX. They do different things, but they are all can be used to transform XML data or display XML data in a different way. I guess CSS is not technically a transformation, but it's more of a style sheet, but it's related. So these are all technologies that are already being harnessed for publishing dictionaries and scripture. All of that is being used in different ways. LaTeX has been used to publish some Arabic scripture in Cameroon, or Ajamiya scripture in Cameroon, and then Pathway uses XSLT to export from Paratext and from Flex. So this is Flex, Fieldworks Language Explorer, produced by SIL, and I guess there are other partner organizations in that as well, are there?
Yeah.
No? This one's SIL?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, we've had other people from other organizations work on it in the
Okay.
past.
So we have quite a few representatives from the Flex team here. And a new generation of linguists has been trained on Flex. This is what is taught here at GIAL and at other linguistic schools, at least the ones that I'm familiar with. And many in the field are transitioning from Toolbox to Flex. Flex uses XML to store its data and offers fields for most of the categories you would need when you're creating a lexicon, but still gives you the option of creating custom fields if you need them. So XML data can look like this. This is a digital representation of a dictionary page. This is called Webinary, and this is Bongi. Did I get it right? Okay, I have a hard time with the stress on that word. But this is I've been working with Dr. Booten on getting his lexicon or his dictionary up and running on this website, along with many other dictionaries that are doing this, so that the people group can actually get online and search the dictionary, find out what is the English word for this word, or do the reversal, go the other direction. This is an export from the XML that was imported into into Webinary. This is another use of the XML. I actually exported this out a while back from my Flex database and put it into Anki flashcards. There are a few people that have been working on this, Jonathan Coombs a while back, and I had a methodology for doing it. But you can actually put in audio files and pictures and things like that, and so you could actually learn your language. Once you've got a lexicon, you could drill yourself on the language by using tools like this, and that's, again, another XML transform. And I'll come back to this one. This one is actually on the back side of your handout. And also, of course, a printed dictionary. This is the Akusi English Dictionary by Robert Hedinger in Cameroon, and this one was published from Flex. XML also allows you to do linking. So in this case, this is from the page that the dictionary page that I had scanned, or that was scanned. So situate is situated is linked to the word situate. So they're related words, and Flex makes sure that when you have a link, that there's something on the other end. It may be an empty entry, but at least the entry is there. Again, something that Toolbox couldn't do. So publishing XML data is, and this is my favorite word from Disney, automagic, mostly. Because of the structure, it's really easy to transform the data, and there are tools out there that will get you a first draft copy very easily. Pathways is one of them, and there are other ways that you can get exports out. And if you need it to be configured, then you can work with a technician to do the configuration that you need, and after that, you can export it anytime you want, and it will be in that format. You do the configuration once, and then every time you need it in that format, you just export it again and try again. So if, okay, I've already said that. So you don't, very often, and one thing that I didn't mention yet on the Word documents, is if you decide that you want a copy of your Word document it's on letter, and a copy of your Word document that is on A4. You set it up and do all and lay out all the pages so that it works on letter. You create another copy of the document and set it all up so that it works out on A4. You now have two documents. And if you want to fix anything in either of those documents, then you have to fix it in both places. In this case, XML, the data is stored in Flex or in XML, and you work there. And all these other copies that you make are just snapshots, throwaway snapshots. You print it off for this publishing. You run it into, you put it into Webinary, and it's just a throwaway snapshot that doesn't take much time or effort, except on the computer's part, to actually create it. Oops, wrong direction. There we go. So again, with XML, we're back to where we were before. We have the computer sees the text, the languages, the data categories, the structure, the relationships, and with XML, formatting and structure are separate, which makes it really wonderful, actually. You can say, every time I have a gloss, I want it to show up this way. So if you want to change what every gloss looks like in your printout, you only have to change that in one place. So XML, actually I just talked about this, is an ideal working format where the linguist works. And it contains enough structured information that you can do interesting things with the data, and the linguist can keep on working. Very often, if you want to do cleanup on a lexicon, the linguist has to stop working, you do cleanup, and then they start working again. I can work on a draft copy of it and do and not have to stop them working, which is wonderful. So what does smart data make easy? I wanted to add a column on the end for typed and handwritten that you could actually use that to level your coffee table, because there are no checks on that row. But standard format does have searching and filtering, but it's really hard to check the consistency of it. Desktop publishing, it does have searching and formatting and publishing, but it's really hard to derive another work from it. If you want to derive another work from it, it's a separate copy that is no longer linked. And of these, linking is only really truly possible in XML. Well, it's possible in desktop publishing, but it's not very useful because it doesn't export. So, the technology that I use to link databases in my project is called resource description format. And here's a little video about a company that is exploring this technology.
Wouldn't it be amazing if Google could understand that the words that you use when you're doing a search, well, they aren't just words. They refer to real things in the world. That a building is a building, and an animal is an animal, and that they're not just random strings of characters. If we can understand that those words are talking about those real-world things, then we could do a better job of getting you just the content that you want off the web.
The way Google is trying to build information about real-world connections is by building a knowledge graph. The knowledge graph is about collecting information about objects in the real world. The object could be a person, could be a book, could be a movie, and many other types of things. For example, for a famous person, we collect relevant data about them, such as their date of birth or how tall they are. We can also connect that person to closely related objects in the knowledge graph.
Let's say you're interested in Renaissance painters, or how about how many women have won the Nobel Prize? By understanding the relationships between things, be it between painters in the Renaissance or women in the Nobel Prize, Google can do a better job of understanding what it is exactly you're searching for.
Okay. So, nodes and relationships, points and relationships. The basic idea of RDF is that you can display any information with a subject, a predicate, and an object. And it may require many of those, and it often does, but in that format. So Dean Martin, and these examples are from this site here by Aaron Bradley. Dean Martin has a height of 5'10". An Acme 8GB USB drive has a price of $9.99. And United Flight U323 has a departure time of 16:10. So, if you don't believe that everything can be defined by relationships, let's take a thesaurus. This is from Visual Thesaurus. What is the word that is in the middle here? Car. There you go. So you have done. So if the computer were to show you, and if you didn't know what this concept was, and the computer could show you all of these other relationships, you know something about that point that is missing. Unique identifiers are an important part of RDF, resource description format, because when you point to something, you want to know, when you point to something, you're saying, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about this thing here. You want that identifier to, first of all, exist for a long period of time. You want it to be persistent, and there are standards for that, cool URIs, several things, and that there are standards for that. But also you want to know that you're pointing to the specific thing. So very often, there's a process called disambiguation. And very often, there are many names for one thing. So in this example, Dean Martin, of course, Jerry Lewis's sidekick, and the hardest drinking member of the Rat Pack, all of those refer to the same Dean Martin who was a real person. And in the inverse, you can have one name that points to many different things. So if you say Paris, are you talking about Paris, France, or Paris, Canada? Or Paris, Texas, that's true. That wasn't even, yeah, that's true. So that is an important concept, is how do I link to that one thing? So there are many organizations on the internet that are making open and comprehensive lists of things. SIL manages the ISO 6393 codes, which are known generally as the ethnologue codes, or the three-letter codes for languages. And that is, and that's something that you can link to. IMDb, International Movie Database, and Freebase, they have lists of movies, actors, and music that are spread apart. So you're not going to mix up this movie with its remake because the years are there. Lexfo is a massively multilingual lexicon, and also there's the Encyclopedia of Life that I just found recently that is an open list of plants and animals with specs and data about that creature. It's very interesting. You could point to that one and say, I'm talking about this exact species right here. So what is the web's largest list of specific things? Anybody have any idea?
Wikipedia.
Wikipedia. There you go. And Wiktionary. I'm going to throw that in there because Wiktionary is useful as well. But I know that Wikipedia is generally a bad word in the academic world. But by linking to Wikipedia, you're saying, I'm talking about this specific thing here. You're not necessarily saying that you agree with everything that is written on that page today, tomorrow, or in the future. So Wikipedia, and actually there's a dump of Wikipedia into RDF format that's called DBpedia, so I may use either word for it throughout the rest of the presentation. They have a nearly endless catalog of things. Wiktionary has linked entries for words and concepts in hundreds of languages. If you point to the French word for this, or for avocado, for example, then because that one, the Wikipedia has linkings to the word for avocado in many other languages. So you've actually linked it to other dictionaries and other resources by doing that. WordNet is another lexical resource that acts as a thesaurus, and there are dumps of WordNet that you can access as RDF. So I talked about disambiguation before. This is how Wikipedia does disambiguation. Very often it'll just dump you on the page that it thinks you're looking for, but they have these pages underneath And it's like, well, which Dean Martin are you talking about? This one, the DJ, the footballer, the politician, or a song named after him? Again, the disambiguation work has been done for you. So you would point to this specific one. Underlyingly, in DBpedia, they've pulled all these facts for Dean Martin. And every one of these facts can have multiple entries. For example, is recorded by of, so songs recorded by Dean Martin. Is artist of, is starring of, where did he die, where and when did he die, where and when was he born, the years that he was active. Tons of facts. I'm sure his height is in there somewhere, but I didn't see it on this list that was mentioned in the previous one. So this is a graph of all of the resources as of 2011. So it's an older list that are open and accessible data that you can point to to make your data more robust. In the core of that is DBpedia, which is that dump of Wikipedia that I talked about before. Freebase is also a very large database. Lingvaj is a lexicon. Project Gutenberg is one that you're probably familiar with. A lot of free books out there, so you can actually point to this specific book. And World Factbook has a lot of information about countries and populations and politics, things like that. So what can you ask in RDF? Well, based on DBpedia, Gary wanted to find out which languages had useful Wikipedia pages that were more than just stubs, more than just there is a page and it's empty. So I wrote a query and asked it of DBpedia, and the prose version of the query is, show me the DBpedia data linked to each 3-letter code, include the abstract of the page if available, and links to the other language Wikipedia pages about the same page. So that's actually what the search looked like. It's Sparkle, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later, which is it's related to SQL. It's a standard way, or a semi-standard way, or well, common way of requesting data from a database, because you can say, I want this, this, and this, but not this, and link it to this. It's very, very in-depth. So these were the results of that request, and this goes on and on and on for pages and pages. Here's the 3-letter code, here's the language, here's the DBpedia page, and if I cut it off, this is much brighter. If I cut it off here and put Wikipedia, en.wikipedia.org, and put that, then I actually would get the Wikipedia page for that language. For example, very often a page may have, or a language may have different names depending on which language you're talking about, or whether it's internal or external. By going through this 3-letter code, I made sure that I found it, that I found the correct page. So another question was, well, what information is out there about the languages of the world? Most of what's on Wikipedia for many of the minority languages is just copied from the ethnologue, but it would be interesting to see what else is there. So download all facts and links in DBpedia from English pages about every language and then sort them by language code. And this is the query again. And the result, I had to divide it into 2 files because it would only download in a chunk at a time. 25 megabytes of data on A to M and almost 19 megabytes of data for N to Z. And that's just the text data. That's not including any pictures or images, videos, things like that. A lot of data out there. So if you're building a lexicon, what sort of things would you want to link to? Well, I mentioned before the ISO codes. Yes, you definitely want to link to the ISO codes so that you can say, I'm talking about this specific language here, and there's no confusion. GOLD is a structured web of linguistic terms and concepts. It's and their relationships. It's called the GOLD, a general ontology of linguistic description. And so that's out there, and that's something that I used. And ideally, you could link every entry to its Wiktionary in the vernacular, or in the analysis language. So your analysis language is French. You determine that this is the object. You could link it to the Wikipedia page, and that makes it more robust. I'll talk about that later. But, and also, any classification system that you have in your database is useful. Semantic domains are very much a viable candidate because they are structured, they're already in there. You can pick out a specific semantic domain number, and you say, oh, I'm talking about fruit, mammals or birds, things like that, and even more specific than that. So Gary also likes to talk about time zones. So each language has a specific way, specific classes of features that behave in a specific way. And linguists love to show off what is different about the specific language they're studying. So if a linguist defines for their language these categories, recent past, distant past, not so recent past, and yesterday, what do they all have in common? They're all past tense. If you were doing a search for past tense, you would want all of them to come up. So Flex has pre-populated lists for morpheme types, parts of speech, inflectional features, relationship types, lexical relations, anonym, synonym, semantic domains, anthropological categories. And I went through all the lists that were in Flex and pre-linked them to their exact feature if it was possible, for example, recent past. And if I couldn't link it to the exact feature because I couldn't find it in the list, then I linked it at least to past tense and to tense. This is a page from Gold. And so you see recent past tense is under tense, morphosemantic property, linguistic property, abstract. If you have you may have a different structure or a different framework than this, but it's very useful to have this structure at least so that you can ask, so that since I have defined recent tense as an inflectional feature, you can now ask for morphemes marking tense, morphemes marking past tense, and morphemes marking recent past. And that entry should show up in every case. This is very similar to the phonological features that are in WALS, which is a catalog of phonetic features across the world's languages. I also needed a structure for my RDF, and I adopted mostly the one called Lemon here. That, again, we were talking about the structure before. We have the lexical entry, we have the sense. You're pointing it out to the ontology, which is all of the, which is the terminology that you're using and the relationships in there. And then the lexicon can have different parts of that. So as I mentioned before, it would be nice to be able to link every specific entry to a URI, to something out in the real world to say that's what I'm talking about. But that's something that the user would have to do, and they would have to control it. It could be semi-automated, but they would have to still verify. I really do mean that thing, because it won't be able to guess 100%. There are tools for working with that sort of, or for doing that sort of information, or that sort of work. OpenRefine is really cool. And also DBpedia Spotlight. OpenRefine tries to link it to DBpedia or Freebase, and DBpedia Spotlight will actually take a paragraph and read from the context and figure out, oh, you're talking about, if you were talking about Texas, it would assume that you were talking about Paris, Texas, rather than Paris, France, because of that context. None of them are really adapted for dictionaries yet. Okay. So I took a Flex database in my project, and I exported the parts that were important to me as lift XML. So that was this. I took that lift XML, and this is where I spent most of my time on the project, was tweaking the transformations to pull out the important structure. I converted it to RDF. And I told you I'd already done as much of the mapping as I could. So I mapped to Gold, which is there. I mapped to Lemon, which is the structure. I created Lexical, which is all the structural information that was not already in Lemon. I linked to semantic domains, and every entry has to have its unique identifier. So I generated a code, and just to make it human readable, I put the lexeme at the front of the list, at the front. This is what RDF looks like, more or less, underneath. It's just a list of columns, subject, predicate, object. And these are the relationships. So this entry has a sense, and that sense has this identifier number. And this sense has a definition, and that definition is this. So then I uploaded the lexicon to the server. And this is what I got for one entry. This is actually the entry for sitting, and this is what's on the back. And that's just a single entry with all of the linking that shows all the information that is implicit in the structure and the data. So this is actually that whole page of the dictionary. All of the points in that same format. There are 884 facts 884 pieces of information now, because I have put it in this structured format. Some of those are sense numbers, and some of them are types and things, but allows you to do really interesting searches across it. I repeated that process for more lexicons, which was now by this point sort of a press play, and it goes through once I had written all the transforms. So these are the databases that I imported into my lexicons that I imported into my database. So the first one was Badwe from Cameroon by Keith Bevan, and then Bongi from Malaysia by Dr. Boutin, Ewando from Professor Isono in Cameroon, Marwari from Jonathan Daly, and I took some small student databases from Field Methods and Data Management that I already had and transformed those as well, because although they're small, they're very rich. So the results, the 5 student databases that I transformed had this many triples, this many pieces of information on their final database that could be queried. The 4 large lexicons that I transformed had this many, 2,164,000 pieces of information. Those are large dictionaries. And I took an import of Webster's dictionary, and I actually couldn't put it on the server because it was over 5 million, and the software I'm using has a limitation of 5 million per graph. So how do you link those graphs together once they're created? Well, they're already linked. I've already done all the linking, so they have points of intersection all over the place, and they're connected. So they're already linked to the graphs that link to the same resources, and they're already linked to any resource that resource links to. Another step. So now I could start asking questions. Again, this is the interface. This is actually where the database management software here. I could ask this question here, and it would give me the results at the bottom. It also has this interface where you can really play with it and move things around and explore and wander through the database. You can click on a link and say, okay, show me everything that connects to this, show me everything that connects to that. So again, you saw Sparkle before, and this is the first question or one of the first questions I asked it. Which words have a gloss of monkey? Very easy question, and a fairly simple form compared to some of them. So from some of the databases, this is what I came up with. In the field methods class, they were actually using different writing systems for each student. So we have multiple versions of the transcription, and this is in Japanese and these are in Mandarin. So it's pulled up resources from each one. Another step, what are all the words that have a gloss or a definition, including moon? I also included loon because some of the databases I had French glosses. And so this is what I came up with. So some from the gloss column, some from the definition column. It's actually merging those results together. Next query I could ask, select all the words from the semantic domain 5231, foods from plants. So here's the query. And these are the results. You'll notice here, I asked for 5231. It also included 52312 and 52311 because the way that semantic domains are structured, if you're in a very specific level and you go one step up, that thing should also be contained in that category, and again, all the way up to just 5. So I didn't have any related lexicons in my data set, and I didn't think I'd be able to do much information on borrowed words, do much searching on borrowed words. But the page that I showed you before, and I didn't even notice this at first when I pulled the databases. The words from Bongi from Malaysia, and Marwari from India, they have the same word, basically, for grape. So I learned from this that Malaysia doesn't grow grapes, and Bongi adapted the Malay word for grapes, which comes from Persian. And according to this resource here, grapes were introduced into northern India in the 1300s by Persian invaders and were common in southern India by 1430. The Hindi word is also similar. So I accidentally found a borrowed word that I wasn't looking for, even though the databases didn't really have information saying this is borrowed from here. So I can also make really complex queries, show me all the two-letter affixes that are marked for tense. In addition, show any aspect marking that is also included, if appropriate, and sort them by affix type, tense, language. You can ask that sort of question, and it will give you those results back, and you can look through them. So more lexicons and richer data means more interesting questions. So how much data can an RDF database hold? Well, the DBpedia English is 4 million things, 470 million pieces of information. The entire DBpedia with 119 languages is 24.9 million things and 2.46 billion pieces of information. This technology will go huge if it needs to. So digital stewardship, publishing lexical data and linguistic data in the digital age is a step toward SIL's MC, which is increasing, or where individuals and communities benefit from increasing body of knowledge regarding the world's languages and cultures. And this could be offered as a service through the internet with single requests for users, people that want to look up a specific word, internal access for people that really need related language information, and APIs and subscriptions for large organizations that really want to do big data dumps and processing of that data. My test was very small scale, 7 million pieces of information across 9 lexicons, and I used Allegro Graph, which actually has some really nice features, but it's only free up to 5 million triples per graph. And I'm running it on a rented server, and access at this point is not pretty. It's just that it's mainly that Sparkle query. It's not very simple to use. So to move this into the future, it would need a more user-friendly interface where you can ask questions and set constraints, web-based ways to move around in the graphs, and program interfaces for high-power computation. And we need to explore these issues: collection of databases and updates, provenance and status. Where did this dictionary come from? How has it been checked? Is it consultant checked? How do we make sure that the linguist gets credit for the data that you pulled up when it pulls up a specific piece of data? Security constraints, are there things we need to constrain in this dictionary, the whole dictionary, some of the dictionary? And obviously funding, because if we use this software, then we would need to, the organization would need to pay a license fee. If we use free software, we'd have to do some adaptation to get it to do some of the things we want it to do. So the interesting questions for me is, how can this be expanded to include other elements in Flex, the grammar, the phonology, the text, the discourse? And how can we help the user with disambiguation so that they could actually link to all of these URIs if they wanted to make their dictionary more robust? And can this become my master's thesis? That's the other question. So, the major references used in this are here. One of the middle QR code, number 2 on here, if you scan that or if you type in the link, then it will take you to a PDF copy of this presentation. And thank you to Gary Simons for making this all sound easy and guiding me when it isn't. The Fieldworks team for getting us this far. So many of you are here. Dr. Booten and Dr. Krager for helping me get the independent study. For Michael Booten and Jonathan Daly for permission to use their lexicons, and those that I didn't actually ask permission. Professor Sono, Keith Bevan, and the field method students of 2013 and 14 that provided me with data. Any questions? Background story for this: when I did my thesis in college, this was the final frame of my thesis presentation. So, any questions? We got a little bit of time, a few minutes, 5 minutes, less than I hope. Yes?
How long did it take you to write that long Sparkle statement?
I wrote it in chunks. I would ask a simple question. Oh, how long did it take to write the Sparkle statement? There we go. I wrote it in chunks. I would actually go through and I would ask a simple question and make sure I got results. And then I would add on one more level and add on one more level. Because if you ask too complex a question, you don't get any results. Or if you ask a question that limits your results too much, you don't get any results. But wrote it in chunks. I've done SQL before, so it wasn't that strange. It just, yeah. Anything else? Yes?
If somebody comes up with a lexicon in a particular language, they're thinking, I'm doing this for me, what can I benefit from other people's lexicons as I'm working on this one by using this kind of format? That is, the typical idea is I'm doing this language, but there's all this other stuff out there. How can this improve the lexicon I'm working on?
Okay. The easiest method is if you were able to access the related lexicons from related languages, you can ask interesting questions. And one of the questions that was on the sheet there was, do any of the related languages have a non-borrowed word for faith? So if you're looking for a specific term, you can search, like I searched for the plants in that case. You can find out what words they're using, and you can prompt people. It's like, well, wait a minute, do you have a word for this specific concept? And also you can look at this. You can look at the structure, the example sentences. And at this point, the only way you can get a Flex database from someone is if you get in touch with them and they send it to you, or if you were added to their shared project. But there's a lot of cross-linguistic information that it's already structured, it's already there. We just have to make it accessible. Yes?
I can see the benefit if somebody's starting a new dictionary project or a new lexical database of building in from the ground these types of links to resources, whether it's semantic domains or something else that you're talking about.
Yes.
If you already have a large database that you built over the years or that you inherited from somebody, and it doesn't have all of this built in, are there tools to speed up the process of adding that structure where it's not there from the beginning? Because that would be as large a task, I would think.
Yes. Well, putting it into Flex in the first place, if it was SFM, that's a huge part. But I've done. Are there tools to help with this? To help with getting other resources to be more rich? There are tools in Flex. For example, semantic domain will now do searches for you, and it will suggest semantic domains based on your glosses. If you don't have all that extra data in there, your database is still useful because you can search on glosses, you can search on what you do have. But I mean there will be needs for people to have easy and accessible ways to get that information and to get that depth done. That some of them are already built into Flex, some of them may be in the future. Yes.
When I was in the Philippines, there's 4 Ifugao languages. I was working on one, developing the dictionary, editing it. I was able to get the glossaries from the other 3 languages and found out what is different in theirs. Like bananas, there's different things you can do with bananas. And I also found out words that they had glosses for that I didn't. Can this RDF handle that?
It can do that, yeah. I mean, if they have a word, you can search for it, and you would need to filter by the languages, which ones you're looking at and which ones you're interested in. But yeah, you could do it by semantic domain, and if they've done that, and you could say, give me all the things that are in this category. If they're not that robust, then you can search for the specific term, banana, in the national language, and it will allow you to pull up all that information. And if there's another term that you could come up with, a broader term, then you can search for that, and you'll get more data than you need, but that's a good thing.
Matthew,
Yes.
You mentioned the only way to get a hold of these databases is to get someone to give them to you. Now, how about Webinary? What is the possibility of linking data that's put out on Webinary?
Well, there are several resources. Webinary is already transformed, and it would be difficult to pull it back out again. But Language Depot, which is where the shared databases are stored for Flex, and also let's see. Well, and also REAP. REAP archives are 2 other places that we could pull the data from. Pull down the whole Flex database, or just pull down the lift, depending on which source it's coming from. So those are published places that it's accessible from. I think Webinary would be sort of reverse engineering from a presentation format back into a database, and it would be more work. But yeah. Yes.
In terms of the asking of questions, do you have to speak XML, or can you actually use English?
You can, okay, as for asking questions, an interface can be built very easily that gives you controls that you say, you pick from a source box, you pick from a box. I'm looking for nouns, I'm looking for verbs, I'm looking for whatever, and I want this language, this language, this language. You can build a very easy interface to ask those questions. It hasn't been built yet for this specific task. Many people that are doing database searches on this have already built an interface that was specific to their data to do it. So for this to be useful, the real power is in Sparkle, but for this to be useful to an ordinary working linguist or someone in the community. It needs to be an intuitive interface, and that's something that will have to be built on top of the database to make it accessible. And there are far better people in this room to do that than me. So, yes.
At this point, I get to say thank you. That's the clearest presentation I've ever heard on, you know, a computer heavy sort of a topic that I could even understand quite a bit. So thank you very much.
When I joined Wycliffe, everybody's like, oh, what languages do you speak? I was like, well, I had a little bit of French, but I'm joining Wycliffe because I speak nerd.
There you go.
And that was the big thing, is I could try, and here is the example of trying to translate nerd into whatever all of you speak. So.
You were pretty successful. Thank you.
Thank you.